So the new Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse just dropped, or at least it dropped on D&D Beyond. I know that some of you folks have had it for months already because it was released as a part of the box set back in January, February. In any event, Monsters of the Multiverse is new to me and perhaps also to you, so I wanted to quickly go over some of the changes they've made in the book and also talk about what I like about these changes, what sort of changes I would have liked to see, and in general my thoughts on the book as a whole and whether or not I think it's worth spending money on, and also what sort of direction it lays out for D&D 5e. So yeah, and this will be just a quick style video since I'm still recovering from a knee surgery and have to do these videos from my home office. Diving into the book, Monsters of the Multiverse is basically a compendium of monsters and monstrous stuff, including monstrous races. So we'll have a fantastical races, they've decided to call it, instead of monstrous races. And we have a bestiary, which includes a whole lot of monsters. Most notably, it has nearly all of the monsters from Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which are, in my opinion, some of the weaker books in 5e, especially Volo's Guide to Monsters is probably my least favorite source book. Maybe from a mechanical perspective, Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide is probably worse, but it's not. It's a contest between the two of them. In any event, what the book is set out to do is to both compile all of these monsters and races in one book and also revise, revamp, update some of them, make them a bit more interesting, and also apply some of the new design decisions that 5e is leaning towards, which in very large part has to do with how races are applied and how monsters function. So first off, if we dive into the races chapter, we'll have a list of all the races that are included in this book. And these are, for the most part, races that were included in Tome of Foes and the Guide to Monsters. And there are a few extra additions from various source books. So, of course, the notable thing here is that ability scoring cruises are now standardized. So you get +1, +2 to something, +1 to another thing, or you can increase 3 different scores by 1. This is a rule that now applies to all races in 5e. And when we go into a type of race here, we'll see that none of them have stat bonuses for strength, dexterity, and so on. So this is the general rule that you'll always apply using these races and basically using races in 5e from now on. So the changes that have been made to the various races are, for the most part, not huge changes, but I feel that most of them are improving upon the monster that we got in the first place. The Asimar, for example, has been changed a little. The Arakokra has been changed also. It has a faster walking speed, but also a slower flying speed. It gets a wind caller feature, stuff like that. And I don't want to go over every little change because that's not the point here, but I want to draw your attention to maybe some what I think are the most distinct changes. First off, I think it's very distinctive that Fey Ancestry, this advantage on saving throws to make to avoid or end the charm condition itself, has been applied to all goblinoids, I believe, in the book. So that's bugbears, hobgoblins, goblins. And I have to admit that I don't really understand this change. I know that from a lore perspective, goblins and elves are not too far apart. In fact, maybe goblinoids were made from elves, stuff like that. But we don't have Fey Ancestry on any goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears in the book when they're used as monsters, and it's a bit late in the game to start giving them this feature, I think, especially when I don't really see it being a necessary feature to apply to them. So that's just a decision that I find a bit weird, but it's not something that breaks the balance or anything. It's a very, very minuscule benefit, so I don't mind it. I just don't quite understand the need for it. Moving on, I think that, for example, the Goliath is getting a lot stronger and has a more clean write-up than it used to be. It now has resistance to cold damage instead of this weird you're accustomed to cold climates, which is basically useless. We get this, you can use this trait a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, which is also the way that every racial feature and many class features are leaning towards now. And we combine the usual traits that the Goliath would have, proficiency in athletics and counters one size larger, into one little trait here, which is also, I think, a nice way to clean up the stat block. Herringons are unchanged from Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but the Hobgoblin is, for me, very interesting because I feel that this creature has now become a quite different creature than it was originally, and it's been recast, as we can also see here from this attractive Hobgoblin Bard, into a sort of communal, friendly Bard type character, which I think is pretty fun, but also not maybe the way that I viewed Hobgoblins originally, but that doesn't have to mean that they can't be viewed like this, of course. And I think that with these traits, especially the ability to take help action as a bonus action and also do additional stuff with it, as well as the fortune from the Mani, which is basically a watered down pack tactics trait. So you get +3 perhaps to a roll, and you can do this a number of times. You get proficiency bonus. These are sort of features that I find really, really fun. Stuff you can really get some use out of in combat scenarios or outside combat even, making the Hobgoblin a far more enticing character to play. And I like that because Hobgoblins are, in my opinion, some of the more fun goblins. I enjoy Hobgoblins a lot, using them against the players, and I would also enjoy playing a Hobgoblin character in the rare event that I get to play in a D&D game and not just DM1. I want to draw your attention to the Yuan-ti, however, because the Yuan-ti has seen some significant changes, and that's probably for the better because the Yuan-ti was, in my opinion, probably likely the most powerful base race that you could choose, simply because it had both magic resistance, it had poison resistance, and it also gained some pretty powerful spellcasting. Now you see that the Yuan-ti still has all of these traits, but there's a big difference. For poison resilience, you have advantage on saving throws you make to avoid or end the poison condition yourself. You also have resistance to poison damage, but this is vastly different from the Yuan-ti that we got in Volo's Guide, because here we had immunity to poison damage and the poison condition, which is of course far, far better. The Yuan-ti in Monsters of the Multiverse also has magic resistance, which is now reduced to only advantage on saving throws against spells. Now for a monster this would probably not mean a whole lot, but since we are a player character and most of the time that we're gonna be running into combat, we're gonna do so with monsters that have monster stat blocks, and they tend to produce more magical effects than actually using spells. So reducing that to only saving throws against spells instead of saving throws against spells and other magical effects is a significant change and a significant reduction of the Yuan-ti's overall power. Now, while I do like that they have watered down the Yuan-ti a bit because it was too strong in my opinion, it does bring up another issue, and the issue here is, why are we calling this magic resistance and then having it function not like any other time you're going to see magic resistance in book? Now I am aware that this is not the first time that magic resistance applies only to spells. There are a few other instances where this is the case, but I don't like those instances either. I wish they would have called it then spell resistance, so we can know, okay, this character, this monster, this whatever is only resistant to spells, because if you're just going by it at a glance, you might not pick up that difference. You might be so used to magic resistance being resistance to all magic and not just to the saving throws against spells. Now the other issue I have with it is not just with the linguistics here, it is that the new monsters in Monsters of the Multiverse and in 5e going forward get these spell-like abilities, which is something that is not a spell. So we'll just find one here so I can give you an example. Draw. Okay, let's see. This guy has spells, yes. So if we take this Draw favorite consort, for example, who has a fancy shirt on, he gets a spell list like everyone else. That's great. He can cast Fireball and Darkness and Dimension Doors and whatever, but he also gets Arcane Eruption, which is dealing force damage. It is a spell attack, and it is not a spell. Now this doesn't use a saving throw, so wouldn't apply to the Yuan-ti either way. But assuming that it did, we have these other mage-like characters that can cast fireballs as a action. Does that apply to the Yuan-ti's class feature? No, probably not. Why not? It looks like a spell. It tastes like a spell. It can't be countered, apparently. I've talked about this before. I still don't like that change. I really, really want them to be consistent about what is a spell and what is not. Now, if you make a feature that is completely different from any spell we know, and I think that Arcane Eruption can sort of fall into that category, you can call that just him unleashing arcane power like the Emperor in Star Wars. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with that. That doesn't have to be a spell. This is just basically a strong Eldritch Blast. It's fine that that can't be countered. It's fine that that doesn't apply to magic resistance, perhaps, or spell resistance, if we're going to call it that. But the features, the spells that are basically just spells, but don't work like spells in regards to everything else, is something that I'm hugely opposed to. So Divine Flame here would be an example of something that I think falls a bit more into this is just a spell category, because this is basically just the cleric spell. I can't remember the name of it, but the one that deals fire damage and radiant damage on a DC dexterity saving throw. Why not just give the creature that spell, or have it written here that this is a spell or something like that? So yeah, that's one of the changes you'll see in the book, and one of the changes that I disagree with. I just think it's confusing. I can see the point from a balance standpoint, but I wish that the Wizards of the Coast would then address it by also updating Counterspell, perhaps. How does that work? If we're so fallen out of love with how Counterspell works, and I can also understand that we don't like how it just shuts down some characters, or it can just negate spells out of the box. We want monsters to be able to circumvent that, perhaps. Change Counterspell. Give us some new rules for how Counterspell is supposed to work, and I've made my own rules. I can deal with it in my own games, but I feel like a lot of DMs out there maybe aren't aware that Counterspell may need to be updated or changed, or are going to run into some issues or some unhappy players at the table when suddenly the enemy wizard casts Fireball, but it's called Fire Blast, and suddenly your Counterspell doesn't work. So yeah, I've ranted about this before. It's still a change that I do not like. Now, what else does Monsters of the Multiverse do when it comes to monsters? There are a lot of changes that I find are good changes. If we take a look at the Duergar, for example, and I'm gonna scroll to find the right Duergar, because they've hidden those around. Yeah, so let's just take the Duergar Soulblade, because it doesn't really matter which one we take. They have this enlarge feature, and this is now a bonus action. Before it was an action, so you'll spend your first turn in combat with the Duergar enlarging them, and now it just doubles its damage dice. It can be used as a bonus action, so this basically just means that the Duergar does double damage. Now I haven't gone over and see if that maintains the balance of these creatures. Are they now suddenly unbalanced, too strong, too powerful? I don't know, but the way it functions in combat is a lot more fun. I like that a lot more. So that's the general change that I find is nice. It's that some actions have been moved into the bonus action territory, and that just makes it more dynamic in combat, because you'll get to do something with your action, and then you do something with your bonus action, which I think is a nice change. It's something that I've applied in my own games before, and also just writing bonus actions in their own separate category, instead of having them under the actions header, or as they were before up here, is just way cleaner, and probably something that should have been done from the start. It always seemed a bit weird that you'd had headers for actions, reactions, legendary actions, but bonus action, they were contained up here under the features of the monsters, which is just weird. So I like these changes a lot. I like the bonus actions emphasis that we're getting to make combat more dynamic, to make monsters more dynamic, to give us more stuff to do with monsters. Fixing bonus actions is a good move, and I also find that putting the spellcasting into the actions section of the character is also a nice step. They've put it down here instead. I do find it kind of funny still that they told us that they would put in non-combat spells in the spellcasting thing, or that would be something that was emphasized, but all I'm seeing is combat ready spells, because those are the ones that usually take an action to cast. So I don't know why they went out with that information when they first announced these stat block changes, and then decided to do what I felt they should do, and put combat options in the combat statistics of the monster. And you can always decide that your monster or your NPC can cast other spells. but there's really no reason for us to know in combat that the Warlock of the Archfey can maybe cast something that takes an hour to cast. Not going to be relevant. So yeah, I like spellcasting in the stat block. I like that they are using bonus actions more. I think those are both great changes. That doesn't mean that they have changed everything that I wanted them to change. If we go to stuff like these elemental myrmidons, which was something we got, I think, in Tome of Foes, they haven't changed anything as far as I can tell. If they have, it's negligible. So we still have a CR7 creature that does 2 mortal attacks, and then it can make a mortal attack that is a bit stronger sometimes on a recharge 6, so that's basically once per combat it'll be able to do that. Oh, this can deal 2d6 extra fire damage. That's pretty boring. This can slow you down by 10. Oh, that's also, again, pretty boring. So these are still just so stale, and I don't know why they wouldn't go in and just give them something, just a little bit of extra, because terribly, terribly boring creatures still. And I feel like there are some missed opportunities to improve monsters where we're still having monsters that are not really that interesting. So why are we looking at a rot troll? Rot troll, yeah. It has bite and it has claw, and these attacks are identical, basically. You have no options in combat. You can make one bite attack and do claw attacks. That is your option. So why not make the rot troll do something fun? Let it spew rot on creatures in an AoE. Let it dissolve into 2 separate rotting trolls. Let it melt into the flesh of its enemies. Just something, because this is just such a wasted opportunity to improve, like for example the trolls or the myrmidons or the creatures we had that are boring. We also do get a new monster in Monsters of the Multiverse, which is the Dolphin Delighter. So that's a pretty funny monster, actually. Just a Feywild dolphin that can slam you, deal psychic damage, blind you. It emanates light, and it can heal people with that light, which is also pretty great, I think. And it can jump with a bonus action, and it can even take other creatures with it. So this is just a fun addition to the dolphin options we get in 5e. I don't know if it was necessarily a creature that we needed, but if you get a chance to use a magical Feywild dolphin, you'll be happy to have the Dolphin Delighter. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts on Monsters of the Multiverse? Well, in my opinion, it is an improvement upon all of the monsters that they decided to improve. I think they've improved. Now, I can have missed some monsters that are not fun anymore, if they've done something dumb, I don't know. But I think that overall it is an improvement, a vast improvement on especially the boring stuff we got in Volo's Guide to Monsters. And I also feel that the race changes are good. I like spellcasting in the actions column. I like bonus actions being emphasized. I do not like spell-like abilities that are too close to actual spells, or just straight up copies of actual spells that don't function as spells. And I don't like that we get magic resistance that is not magic resistance but is spell resistance. These are sort of inconsistencies that you can sort of turn a blind eye to in the original rules. You'll say, oh, we didn't realize that this would be confusing, this would be a bit weird, so we'll fix that later. But this is a fix. This is the later fix. This is fixing it later. And if that fails to fix it, well, what are we doing? So that annoys me, basically, that you're going in to fix stuff and you're not fixing it. Or you're not fixing everything. You're not fixing these things. And also, of course, as I mentioned, the missed opportunities to fix some monsters that really needed fixing, that really needed improvement, that we are not going in there and actually doing that. But yeah, overall, would I buy this book? Well, I have bought it on D&D Beyond. I don't know if I'm going to go out and get the physical copy. I probably am, because I'm a huge nerd and I usually end up getting all the physical copies, whether I necessarily end up flipping through them that much. This book definitely means that you will not never want to buy, I think, Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes unless you're really interested in the lore aspects of those books, which of course still works. I think there are some very nice additions lore-wise in those books. But if you're just interested in mechanics, stat blocks, and racial stuff, you don't need those books at all. You need this book. This book is the vastly better book for those parts of the game. So if you already own Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, should you go out and invest in this book? I'd say it heavily depends on how much money you have lying around, because if you have limited funds, this book is not a necessity. Most of the changes are relatively minor, and most of the changes are something you could probably look up for, specifically races. That's something where you can just Google around a little and find out, okay, they changed this and that. I can do that in my game as well if I agree. And for the monsters, the changes again are relatively minor and probably something that for the most part is not gonna hugely change how monsters function. I think, as I mentioned, Durga changes, those are great. But overall, we're not looking at something that is groundbreaking here. We're looking at minor adjustments to how things work. As for what this book tells us about the future of D&D, it's up in the air, because if 5.5, or whenever that's coming, is that 2024, I believe, if that continues in this vein with designing monsters the way that we're seeing them here, I'm mostly pleased with the changes, but I do think that we could do more to make monsters interesting, and I do think that we could do more to make monsters less confusing, which is equally important in my book. I would have wanted to see them go in and fix some of the more fundamental issues that I have with monsters. That's a whole video unto itself, but I think that the stat block is bloated with information that I do not need, and is maybe confusing. I think there are wording issues, stylized issues. I think that we still, again, now I just took the Frost Salamander here. Why do we not get a bonus action here? Why is this monster still boring? It's a challenge rating 9 monster that is going to feel like a clump of hit points that can sometimes do a freezing breath. That's besides the point. I do think there's a lot more we could have done with monster design, and this would probably have been the book to do it, unless they're going to do it in 5.5e in 2 years. And if that happens, well, is this book just going to be obsolete 2 years after its publication? That's also maybe not the most fun thing in the world. Anyway, this is my rant on Monsters of the Multiverse. If you liked the video, go ahead, like and subscribe. And you can also decide to become a patron over at patreon.com/Eventyr. I try not to put these unskippable mid-roll ads or starting ads on videos. I do think we have some ads on some videos, but those are always the skippable ones, because I hate ads with a passion, and I try to keep it that way. So if you want to help this channel stay afloat and help us put out D&D content, head on over to patreon.com/Eventyr and become a patron, and you'll also get access to a very large archive of stuff you can dive into. So that was my ad, and this was my video on Monsters of the Multiverse. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.